Very well, guys. So we're now going to continue with the metal texturing, and the metal is very, very interesting because you can go for very like old school metal, very clean metal. So there's a lot of variations, and here one of the best advices that I can give you is look for reference. So if we look for old metal, for instance, you're gonna see that old metal is very rusty. It is not as shiny. It has a lot of like dirt and things like that. I think something like this is a perfect example of the kind of metal that I would like to have. We can also look, for instance, for the old hammer, right? Because the main like thing right here is a hammer, and we can see how the metal is looking. Because right now, even though this is a stylized weapon, we do want to go for sort of a realistic look on the texturing of our element. So I'm gonna like collapse the stone element. Let's go all the way down here to metals. And we have this stylized metal as our base element. I'm gonna look for metal, and you're gonna see that we have, for instance, a rust. Now, one of the cool things about the substance system is that you can utilize things that you would normally not use for your elements to generate like interesting textures and element or interesting textures and oh my god, I forgot about the word. Interactions between the elements. There we go. So, for instance, right now we have this stylized raw metal, which I really like the color of. It's not exactly the color, so I'm gonna try and see if I can sample this exact sort of like bluish hue that we have. There we go. That's a little bit better. Roughness wise, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of roughness, but we do have roughness if we bring in the metal the rust. So one of the things that we can do is we can eliminate the color from the rust and even the metal from the rust and just use its like little roughness and height information to generate this very interesting effect on our object. Look at how nice that starts looking, right? Like this very old damaged metal. Now, one of the cool things about this as well is that we can go not only to the base color, but for instance, to the height information, and we can bring the intensity of the height lower so that we get a little bit of that texture, but not too much, you know, like not too much. We can bring the grain intensity down. We can also, for instance, bring the tiling down so that we're going to have like bigger like spots. Look at that. And since this is only affecting the color and a little bit of the roughness, we're going to be able to generate something that looks very, very nice. I do think the color right here, let's go back to base color. The original stylized raw metal is a little bit too blue and a little bit too dark. So we're going to bring this a little bit further up. There we go. And look at how much more interesting this thing becomes, right? Now, this one, of course, will have some rust. So let's just add a normal rust layer on top, and we're going to add a black mask. Right click, we're going to add a generator, and we're going to add a dirt generator. So again, right click on the mask and generator. Look at that. We get the rust exactly where this thing is meeting all of the different like crevices and points of the object. This one, as I've mentioned before, I like to change to overlay so that we get a nice like little effect right there. And look at how nice this rust starts looking. Like it really builds up and generates this very, very interesting effect on all of the points that are like mixing with each other. I still think, let me see. I think this rust, I mean, I like it, but it's a little bit too much. So I'm going to go here to the dirt, and I'm going to bring the dirt down a little bit. And especially the grunge amount, I'm also going to bring it down because I don't want to have like a lot of rust everywhere else. I just want to have it like around the edges of the object. So again, we play a little bit with that, and look at how nice this object is starting to look. Thanks to the fact that this is asymmetrical, we can get some very, very interesting effects as well. Now, another thing about metals is that usually metals will have this sort of like edge wear, right? Like you're going to see the cleaner or newer metal on the parts that are damaged. So I'm going to grab this metal, I'm not sure which one. I think I'm going to grab again the stylized one, stylized raw metal. And we're going to change the color so it has no color. There we go. This is perfectly clean. And we're going to add another black mask. And we're going to add, of course, a generator. And this is going to be the metal edgeware. This is going to allow me to get this very nice shine on all of the borders of the element. Now, this is a little bit too much, right? So I'm going to bring the intensity down so we don't see as much. Look at how nicer that looks. And that's going to allow me to have this very interesting clean effect pretty much everywhere without having to worry too much. I think now that we're a little bit too light, so I'm going to go back here and make the color of the metal a little bit lower. There we go. That looks really good. Perfect. So now we can use again the trick that I showed before with the volcano so that we don't get this exact same sort of like roughness everywhere on the hammer. Some people like it. I personally don't like it, to be honest. So I like to add always a fill layer over here, and we're going to add another clouds. We can try the clouds 3, for instance, now. We can play with the balance, we can play with the contrast, and then multiply this against the other element. And as you can see, it really helps break down the effect. Then if we feel that's a little bit too much or a little bit too less, we can play a little bit here with the balance as well and modify it until we get an effect that we want. Now, here's where we can start building up like more interesting elements. For instance, I would expect more parts of this hammer to be exposed with like a newer metal. So I'm gonna go again to the mask and I'm gonna right click now and I'm gonna add, instead of a generator or a fill, I'm gonna add a paint layer. And the cool thing about this is we have brushes over here. I'm gonna go back to see all of the brushes that we have available. And we could use, for instance, this a dirt 1 brush. I'm gonna double click, and now what I can do is I can paint to remove some of this effect directly on the parts where I want, which is super, super, super useful, because now I got more artistic liberty to really, really, really paint out the elements that I need. Down here on the brush properties at the very, very bottom, we're going to have this grayscale that's telling us whether we're adding or removing from the mask. Because remember, all of these things that we're doing right here are on the mask. So I'm removing all of this information from the mask right here. As you can see, we get this very nice shiny hammer on the border. So when we move or rotate this thing around, we're going to get a very, very nice effect. Then if we want to remove or bring back a little bit of this old metal, we can just press X is the shortcut to switch between black and white. And we can bring X back so that we can paint out or remove some elements. We could also, for instance, be like, hey, you know what? Like I want this specific corner to be a little bit more damaged. Well, here's where we paint it. We paint that little damage just in that corner. And this is what's going to separate our elements from everyone else's elements. Because very commonly when we use things or tools that are automatic, such as generators, things are going to look very, very much like the same, like everyone else's. So if you want to create something that looks a little bit different from everyone else, this is where you go in and manually start adding this sort of like details to make your asset, in this case, our hammer, our own. And look how nice all of this thing is looking. Quite cool, right? Now, I do want to add another layer of like a dirt, like grime. So I'm going to go back to the materials. I don't think we have a specific like grime effect. We got a lot of stylized things, but not specifically like a rock. So we got this clay terracotta. Let's try that one. Let's see. Oh, yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. The only thing we need to do is change the color, but that's a great sort of like grime and dirt. Look at that. Let's go darker. There we go. Kind of like soot, right? Like when you extinguish a candle and you get this sort of effect. That's great. I'm going to add a black mask and I'm going to add a paint layer. And now if we go to the layers again, we can, again, just grab our dirt 1 and be like, hey, you know what? Like I would like to have a little bit of that effect. Oh, let's close that. There we go. A little bit of that effect right there. And as we start adding, look at how much texture and detail we're adding to the whole thing. Let's bring this all the way to the top. And we can manually, again, start adding this sort of effect. So on all of this area close to the stone, I feel like it makes sense to have this sort of like soot that's being accumulated from the lava and all of the different elements. Look how nice we can make this thing look. Even this one, I feel like adding a little bit of this effect here and there is also really good. So remember when we were modeling this like armor bits and I told you no need to worry about them being too simple because we're going to be adding textures to it. This is what I meant. Look how much more like interesting we can make the whole thing look by just adding a little bit of that layer and making sure that we get a nice like cool contrast pretty much everywhere. Let's go to the other side because remember this is asymmetrical, so we need to add a little bit more of that like dirt on all of this area right here. Same like here, for instance. I feel like it kind of looks like rust as well. So it's a lot of very, very cool detail that we can add. Now, of course, there's more advanced painting techniques. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to cover them in this course, maybe in a future one. But I truly like encourage you guys to try out Substance Painter. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing tool. And as you can see, we can get some very, very cool effects. Let's add a little bit of like damage here, especially like here near the stone. It's also going to allow me to blend in the different textures and get a very, very nice texture over here. Careful with the fact that this is symmetrical, so you want to try to do this away from the symmetry line so that it's not as obvious. But as you can see, You can get some really, really cool effects. Like, I was not expecting this terracotta layer to look that good, but look at how much detail we can add very, very easily. Nice, 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 nice. Now, another thing that I like to do is you can see that there's certain areas of the metal that are a little bit more like damaged than others, right? So I'm gonna add another layer here. It's gonna be a white layer, just color. I do want to have roughness. It's gonna be a soft roughness, and this is of course gonna be metal. So I'm gonna make this metal. I'm gonna add a black mask, and with a brush, but I'm gonna go for a softer brush. Let's go here in the brushes, and let's grab, for instance, this, like this, dirt spots moss. What I can do here is I can add, as you can see, certain like little elements here and there to, again, I add just a little bit of variation to the texture. Like I don't want the textures to be super clean. So by adding this sort of like little dots here and there, as you can see, we can add something that looks a little bit more interesting. One of the most important things about the textures is that we want to tell a story. So by adding these variations to the elements, we're going to be able to do this. For instance, here on the handle, if this is the part that the character is going to be holding the most, I would expect it to be a little bit lighter than the rest of the elements, because he's like using it a little bit more than what you would expect, right? So now we can bring this down underneath the terracotta so that it's not as light. But as you can see, we can get a very nice effect. And later, if we need to, we can, of course, like lower the intensity. Same thing, for instance, here on the top. We can add some of those like little dots here and there. And it's going to allow us to build up something that looks a little bit more interesting and not just like a flat metal texture. So look how much visual interest we can add from absolutely nothing, just a basic shader that we would have inside of Blender, for instance, and by adding a little bit of textures, we're able to get a really cool result. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to show you one more because I really like this layer. So I'm gonna add one more layer here. It's gonna be a shiny leather, so it's gonna be metallic, low roughness, and like quite white. I'm gonna call this scratches. I'm gonna right click, add a black mask, right click, add a fill layer, and there's a generator called scratches. If we just look for it right here, scratches, that we can use to generate, as you can see, scratches all over the place. Look at that. So it's some very cool like effects that are going pretty much everywhere. Now we can of course change a couple of things. So for instance, we can change the balance, which is how many scratches we have. We can change the tiling so we got more scratches, like smaller scratches. So I'm going to have a low valence with a relatively high scratch ratio. There we go. And then one of the things that we can do if we go back to this guy is we can go to the height information and we can push these scratches down. Look at that. So now it looks like these scratches are actually eating inside of the element or going inside of the element. So scratches are really cool, especially here for the hammer, for instance. I think they really help sell the effect of a damaged hammer. I think this might be a little bit too much. But one thing that I don't like is that they're going pretty much everywhere. So I'm going to go into a paint layer. I'm going to add a paint layer. I'm going to paint out some scratches that I don't like. So just like manually go there. The ones that don't make sense, areas that you wouldn't expect to see as many scratches, I'm just going to like get rid of some of them. I'm going to leave quite a bit. For instance, down here, let's just leave a couple of scratches here and there. So that's why you don't need to do everything in sculpting, because as you can see here, instead of texturing, we have access to a lot of tools that can make our whole element very interesting. There we go. Now I'm gonna go back to the volcano, to the rock, because I really like the terracotta thing that we found here with this one, this clay terracotta. So I'm gonna add it on top. And what I wanna do is, of course, I'm gonna make it a lot darker. Add a black mask. And I want to add a little bit of the sort of like dirt in certain areas. Look at that. So that's also going to change the way things look. It's going to give me a little bit more visual interest. And now not everything's going to be perfectly like the same. I'm going to bring this all the way down so that the dirt is on top. And then we can play around with things such as overlay again. No, overlay is too much. I'm going to try linear dodge. There we go. And then just like reduce this a little bit. So that as you can see, what that will do is it will give a little bit more color to certain areas. And now my stone's not going to be perfectly like similar, and this happens very often. Like if you go to the mountains, you're gonna see that rocks are not like completely uniform in regards to color, so you're gonna have a little bit of tones here and there. Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful. So now that little terracotta layer, as you can see, it really helps us add a little bit more interest to the whole thing and makes it look not as uniform as what we had. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like everything else looks good. I'm not gonna spend much time on the metal down here. Like it already looks quite nice. So now the next thing is gonna be the blade. I wanna do the blade first without the element because I was thinking about like how this axe could work on the game, and it could be like an unactive volcano that when you like gather enough energy or whatever, it becomes this powered up axe and it glows red, right? So we're gonna do the unpowered version first, the normal blade, and after that we're gonna jump and do the emission. So yeah, hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next one.